Greetings, this is Timothy, almost the Digital Apothecary, and today I'm going to be doing a little quick update on medication adherence studies. So I was doing this a little bit last year, and I kind of died off, and I finally had time to do it a little bit more. In fact, today is a snow day for me, so thank goodness for being in the Northeast, I suppose. Got about almost a foot. In the event, this is my November update, and basically it's going to go back about 2 months on different studies that I've been reading that I think are really interesting in terms of implications on digital health and medication adherence. So you're going to know something I call these the digital health medication adherence and optimization reports. The reason why I added optimization is because I think we'll see more studies talking about how you can optimize therapy through these devices and different tools. And I kind of think that's the bigger issue here at play. Philosophically, I've been playing with the idea that these tools don't necessarily really improve adherence per se, but rather it's more or less optimization of therapy for patients that we should be paying more attention to. And I think we're seeing that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we go on. So, first one is Medisafe. So Medisafe put out this report. Apparently, them and Merck in Germany partnered to use Medisafe to basically provide personalized medication insights for certain diseases in different markets, focusing on Brazil, Russia, and Mexico. So far in 5 months, they've found an increase in adherence amongst medications in thyroid disorder, diabetes, and cardiac conditions, for instance. And what they're doing is they're providing personalized insights for patients based on kind of like what should you be eating or what should you be doing. So it's not so much in terms of adherence, but they're mentioning that they saw an 83% adherence rate so far, which is pretty good, especially when you take in consideration most studies say that you're adherent if you're at 80%. So it seems like it's pretty interesting in terms of providing an app for that. And this is kind of getting away, I think, even from traditionally from Medisafe has been known as like this, even the name, trying to help out people with medications to keep on track and not mix them up and such. But in this case, they're really going for this disease kind of process. And I think we're going to see this more from a lot of companies that are in the medication space, is they're no longer really just going to focus on adherence. They're also going to focus on the clinical nature of treatment. And I think we're going to see more adherence companies try to partner with pharmacy or bring on pharmacists to provide things like comprehensive medication management or medication therapy management service as well, because I think they're going to realize that they can't hit that clinical outcome they necessarily want. Medisafe BP study, for instance, that was done for hypertension, found that there was an increased adherence based on a Mirsky scale analysis, which is basically per the patient's self-reported adherence changing, but they found no clinical difference in hypertension, which is what their primary treatment was for. So I think even adherence itself doesn't necessarily change clinical outcomes. That's something that I think is going to be driving things come 2020, and that's why I'm sticking to this optimization. AdhereTech. So AdhereTech put out this pilot study. They looked at 40 patients in the 1-to-1 randomization, and what happened was I think 4 dropped out from each arm, so there were 16 in each arm then, and basically got a smart pill bottle for treatment in cancer, so it was oral oncology. And what they found was that, so they all got smart pill bottles, but only one smart pill bottle was turned on in terms of like making alerts and such. And also, if the patient wasn't taking their medication, then the pharmacist can intervene. And if I can remember that study, they only had need pharmacist intervention a few times, but for such a small pilot, I think that makes sense. Ran for 6 months, and what they found was that, now this is based on median, is what they would put out, but if you look at their table, it also had mean. So mean adherence in treatment arm with a smart pill bottle turned on and give alerts to the patients and had a pharmacist to support, found I think mean 96% adherence or 98% adherence. Median was 100%, versus the control arm had a mean of like 85% adherence and a median adherence rate of 87.4%. So if we were still talking about adherence in terms of, let's say, 80% cutoff, then both arms were adherent. But I think you could argue in this case for oncology, more adherent probably the better. So 100% sounds really good. What I thought was very fascinating, I think I would recommend you guys reading this, I think it's freely available in Journal of Managed Care, especially pharmacy, is that it actually, when you would look at the dosing window for the people with these smart pill bottles because they each had them. You found that the people that had the alert star on the smart pill bottle had a very narrow therapeutic window they were taking their medications. And what I mean by that is they weren't taking hours before, hours after, which compounding it over time, especially if it starts getting too narrow of therapeutic window, you could argue that, too widespread therapeutic window, they weren't really always having a pharmacokinetic level that's acceptable. But, it might be semantics for some people, and some people would say it's okay, other people might not. But for narrow therapeutic and medications, that could make all the difference. Now, what was really interesting is they found that the cost, $96, was financially viable for basically using these smart pill bottles for the adherence. So I think they're like Adherence trying to make a good financial argument for the cost utilization of these. And I often hear that from a lot of companies and a lot of people saying, well, just because we have this, it could maybe increase adherence, but you don't find that, is the cost worth it? I think there is a happy medium cost, and Adherence at the current cost for what their smart pill device costs and what this results found, I think is promising. But again, it's a pilot study, small sample, something that we're going to keep following. And I think Adherence has a few others that they're probably cooking up that we'll probably see. And then I like to see the more long-term data over time. Then we have Proteus. So Proteus put out two things that I think are relatively interesting to talk about. So one was published in the Public Library of Medicine, Public Library of Science and Medicine, and it was focused on wirelessly observed therapy, or WOT, in tuberculosis. And then at the liver meeting that's going on, they had a presentation they gave about hepatitis C, and I'll talk about the TB one first. So what there was is that they basically gave everyone a bioingestible drug, and the patients had to wear a patch, and by wearing the patch, they could see when they took their medications, and they could then basically verify if the person was taking their medication. So what they found was that with the intervention arm using the wirelessly observed therapy, they basically were able to confirm that with WAT, that they had a higher adherence rate versus those that had directly observed therapy. And if you're not familiar with TB treatment, that includes basically having a healthcare professional go into the home or meeting up with them to watch you swallow the medication. So they basically said with WAT that there was 93% adherence compared to DOT, which has 63% adherence. And the benefit of the WAT was the fact that you could track adherence over the weekends when patients that rely on DOT cannot. And one interesting thing reading the paper that stood out to me was the fact that people who were on WAT, once the study was basically going to run off for the time period, didn't want to give it up because they didn't want to go back to DOT. They liked the ease of using WAT to basically not have to rely on someone coming to check up on them or making, the logistical barriers of basically being like at home waiting for someone to check in on them to watch the swallow medication be on their way. And I work in home healthcare, and that's actually one thing that always stands out to me is we have a lot of nurses who go to patients' homes just to make sure they take their medications, and half the time I'm wondering, how big of a burden is this for everyone involved? But then again, those touch points might be very beneficial with certain conditions, especially like substance use disorder or mental health, where those touch points and seeing someone might have more meaning than just necessarily watching them take their meds. The other one was a prospective single-arm, open-label, multi-center study across 18 clinics in the U.S. This oral presentation was on HCV. It had 288 patients, and they followed for 18 months. And basically, they were finding them to be 93% adherence to therapy, and the viral load was reduced, and they had 99% of what they were targeting for clinical. The only problem is that oral presentation, you can see the link below here on this website if you go visit it, doesn't really go much into methodology, so I'd like to see what happens when this presentation goes into a publication. I'd like to read up more on it. But I think Proteus is really sticking towards infectious diseases right now, and if I would have to say, as you're reading over this, is that what stands to me like Medisafe and a lot of these other, I would say, low-tech app-based only solutions are really trying to figure out how to do medication optimization right now, because I think they're going to hit a peak level in terms of how much objectively you can track adherence, and so they need to go a different route versus those that are making hardware. It appears that we're seeing them very focused on oncology, infectious disease, and mental health, and a few other high-cost drugs. And I think that's going to go, as we see more oral biologics come down the space, I think there'll be a higher emphasis on that. So that's something that's standing out to me right now. I think that we're seeing a divergence in terms of where this stuff is going to go in the oral space. CVS Health, and again, Journal of Managed Care Specialty Pharmacy, put a publication together about a retrospective analysis of 558 patients randomized 1-to-1. And what it was looking at those patients who received two-way short messaging services in CML patients on TKIs versus those that just had a traditional refill reminder. And this is just doing a monthly possession ratio, which is basically just look at the billing claims data, see if they're picking up their medications and such. And what they found was that if there was two-way communication that was initiated, that the patients that were new to TKI were basically much more adherent. So a 22% increase in adherence, with adherence defined as 85%. So I saw a difference, and I mean, this kind of makes sense. I think the whole direction we're seeing with communication, trying to go away from just sending a text reminder, which is kind of a standard now for most pharmacies, going towards a two-way SMS kind of makes sense. And I think as chatbots and everything else like that get a little bit better, from a cost stance, I think this will become much easier and more feasible to kind of do different things. Like I could envision like you start a patient new on TKI, and you say, you know, do you take your medications? Have you having any of these side effects? Text us back, and they could basically triage a person for different things. So again, this is very low tech, but I think it's definitely on the right path. And based on volume and size, I think CVS are trying to focus and figure out how to do this effectively. And then we have Propeller Health, which I've been enjoying their publications and stuff they've been coming out with. And they had a publication in JMIR. JMIR has so many different journals right now that I really have a hard time keeping track of, so I don't really know what the difference is with formative research these days, but let's go with it. So what they did was they did a retrospective analysis of 190 patients using their smart sensors that you attach to an inhaler, in this case a SABA, which is albuterol. And what was basically, it seems like this study was more trying to figure out from a feasibility stance, you know, what's the effectiveness. So they looked at COPD Medicare patients, and it was kind of like looking at what clinicians would see from engaging in the platform and deciding, like, you know, their feasibility. And what they found was that over multiple clinical areas, they saw clinical improvement over 12 months. And I think this one, as I mentioned before, this whole medication optimization, I think that's a big focus here. Is, you know, let's just get away from talking about adherence itself. Let's talk about the utilization of this technology for patient care. And I think, to be honest, a lot of these devices and companies need to focus on that. I think Propeller right now is a little bit ahead of the curve. I think some others, based on what I've heard, are on the right track as well. So I think we'll see a lot of these types of studies start coming out, and I'm really happy for them. But of all of them, unfortunately, what I really liked that stood out to me was Adherence, because they actually took into consideration what I've been a proponent of having pharmacists in part of this kind of process. And I think that's a big thing, because I think we should own this data and help intervene on it. Again, this was a small pilot, so the amount of times it happened was very small. But this one's still more focused on clinician, which I think you could see this with other people. I mean, I don't see any reason why a lot of this couldn't be a pharmacist. Basically, half the time is trying to figure out, should you do a teleconsult, or should you do a follow-up, should you have an patient, or does this person need to be triaged and go on for admission and such. So, like, that stuff I think is kind of low stakes. Then we had other studies I saw. I didn't go into huge detail just because either I couldn't find out too much information about them just based on I didn't have access to them, or looking through abstract I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, but I've kind of seen these things in the past. So one that stood out, I might do a little more review on this, is that they were using smart video dosing for basically naltrexone and bupropion for substance use disorder. I think if you're in the addiction space, this is pretty cool. This is a very early in process. Again, it's a feasibility and acceptability study for patients. It stands out to me just because I haven't seen a lot of this in this population, so I think it's relatively cool. Then we have Triplet and colleagues look at digital medicine program with pediatric solid organ transplant patients, basically looking at, it looks like it was encapsulated in medications, so I could not figure out if this was a Proteus study, if there's an eTech study or someone else. I wasn't able to pull it up. If I'm gonna have to probably ask my library to get me a exchange so I can see this thing, but it looks like they were using similar bioadjustable sensor to track adherence. It seemed like they had some benefit, but it's kind of more like implications. Then we had another one, which is on VOT, virtually observed therapy, virtually directly observed therapy. So kind of think about that. Bioadjustable sensor I mentioned with Proteus. In this case, it's basically swallowing it. This one was based in India. I don't know if they're using their own or if they have something else being developed from Emoca Health or AI Cure or one of the others. I think we're seeing a lot of TB, seeing a large amount of interest in this right now. And I know there's been some national and even worldwide attention on this stuff, and there were some conferences that are focused on it. So I think TB will see a huge upsurge of such studies. And then again here, digital health support and treatment for TB. It was published in New England Journal of Medicine. I thought that was kind of interesting in their stuff. It was a very short communication, but if you're TB ID, you're looking at this stuff, I think it stands out. And then I summed this up with some news and pharma updates that were focused. So American Heart Association had some really interesting studies in digital health. I think we're going to see a large expansion on remote patient monitoring and hypertension. Livongo had a publication out talking about it. I swear within less than 5 years, screening for atrial fibrillation, even monitoring with wearables, is going to become a standard at this rate just because of all the studies coming out. There seem to be so many. Otherwise, thought was interesting is Poppet and Novartis are going to be collaborating. I've done a video on this in the past on Poppet in terms of how it works. Pfizer and Poppet are already mentioning collaboration earlier in the year. And then something that stood out was Amazon Alexa is going to start reminding patients to take their medications. And I need to dig into that because I want to know how they're tying the medications with Amazon Alexa. Do you individually get that information, or are they pulling it from somewhere, i.e. PillPack? And I'm very curious to see just in general where big tech and managing patient health information is going to go, especially with the whole blowback from Google and Ascension, I think it was, in terms of accessing their data and having to talk about that. The last thing is Janssen mentioned that they're going to have a sightless trial. I think this is very, very cool. They're trying to get indication for treatment of heart failure, as some other SGLT2 inhibitors are working on. And they're going to have something called the Chief HF trial, which is going to be using wearables to track digital endpoints. And one of the ones I'm really curious if they're going to track is medication adherence through a smartwatch or an app. I had kind of tying it back with symptom management. I would be very curious to see if a patient, because they're saying they're rolling all heart failure patients, but they weren't really, I haven't seen a trial design for this thing, but I'd love to know if they're going to track like loop diuretic use and then like weight, and if you could actually see like in real time what happens over a patient. So yeah, SGLT2 inhibitors are really cool, but I think there's going to be some other stuff that we might collect from this heart failure analysis that we're not aware of. And this is basically my November report. If I see a lot of studies in December, I will do another update, but if not, I'll just wait another month or two and go do it in January. So I'm going to only do these when there's a wide variety or enough studies that are worth doing this. I'm not going to do this if there's only 2. I'll just save them and bank them as time goes on. So anyway, this is Timothy House, the Digital Apothecary. Thank you and have a good day.